All right, let's dive into a period of Christian history that totally reshaped Europe. We're talking about a 500-year span that gets this reputation for being the Dark Ages, but honestly, it was anything but. It was a battleground, and it shaped the world in ways we still feel today. Yeah, seriously, forget any idea you have of this being a sleepy, stagnant time. Between 700 and 1200 AD, things were incredibly intense. This is the era where the church didn't just hang on, it fought, it grew, and it built itself into the most powerful force in the entire Western world. So we're going to track that exact fight.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with how the church even became this beacon of authority in the first place. Then we'll get into a wild debate over religious images, see the birth of a whole new empire, and then the main event, an unbelievable showdown between a pope and an emperor that changed everything. Okay, so to really get this, you have to picture what Europe was like right after the Western Roman Empire crumbled. It was total chaos, a messy patchwork of little kingdoms all warring with each other. But in the middle of all that political mess, there was one institution that was offering a totally different vision, a vision of unity.
Think about what that really meant back then. Your whole world was about loyalty to your local warlord, right? And then the church comes along and says, no, there's something bigger. It claimed to be this universal body that didn't answer to kings or emperors, but answered directly to God. Now, this wasn't just some nice idea. It was a political declaration, a real power play that was going to spark centuries of conflict.
And that power struggle? The first major eruption didn't even happen in the West. It kicked off in the Byzantine Empire, way over in the East. And it all started with a crisis that, on the surface, seemed like it was just about art. But believe me, it was really about who called the shots. The whole thing is called iconoclasm. It's a fancy word, but it literally just means image breaking. See, for hundreds of years, icons, sacred paintings and statues, were a huge part of Christian worship. But then in the 8th century, the Byzantine emperor just decided they all had to go. And this was not a polite request. We're talking about a full-on war on images launched by Emperor Leo the Isaurian. His soldiers ripped priceless art from church walls, held these huge public bonfires of sacred icons, and even raided people's homes to confiscate their personal religious symbols. It was a brutal, systematic campaign to fundamentally change how people practice their faith. But the Pope, way back in Rome, was having none of it. He fought back, defending the use of images. And in doing so, he turned this whole debate into something much bigger. The Pope was essentially drawing a line in the sand, saying, hey, when it comes to matters of faith, the church has the final say, not you, Mr. Emperor.
Now, this massive falling out with the Eastern Empire had huge consequences. It basically forced the Pope to look for a new protector, a new military ally who would actually respect his authority. And he found one, a rising power in the West, the Franks.
You can just see this incredible shift happening right here. The Pope gets alienated by the East, so he pivots and forges this new alliance in the West. And it all leads up to this amazing moment on Christmas Day. In the year 800, Pope Leo III places a crown on the head of the Frankish king, Charlemagne, and names him Roman Emperor. That title hadn't existed in the West for over 300 years.
And just like that, you have a whole new power structure in Europe. It's got these two massive centers of gravity. On one side, you've got the Pope, with spiritual authority, the power to say who's a legitimate ruler. On the other, you've got the emperor, with the armies and the laws to run the state. They're supposed to be partners, but you can see how a conflict is just baked right into the system.
And that conflict really just boiled down to this one epic question that would dominate the next 300 years. Who's really the boss? Is it the guy who gives the crown or the guy who holds the sword? Europe was about to find out, and it was all going to come to a head in one of the most dramatic showdowns in all of history.
Okay, so this is where it all goes down. The ultimate showdown. You've got two absolute titans facing off. Pope Gregory VII, who was a fierce reformer, and the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Henry IV. And their battle reached its peak at this tiny, remote castle in the mountains of Italy called Canusa. The specific issue that lit the fuse was something called the investiture controversy. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. For a long time, kings and emperors had been appointing their own bishops. Now, these weren't just religious jobs. Bishops controlled huge amounts of land and money. Pope Gregory saw this as the government meddling in the church's business, and he decided to put a stop to it.
And things just escalated with incredible speed. In 1075, the Pope bans the emperor from appointing church officials. Henry fires back saying, "You're not the Pope anymore." So Gregory unleashes his ultimate weapon, excommunication.
And you have to understand, this was like a political atom bomb. It didn't just kick Henry out of the church, it declared him an outlaw and told all of his subjects they no longer had to obey him.
All of a sudden, Henry's facing a massive rebellion at home. His only move is to go beg the Pope for forgiveness. So he crosses the Alps in the middle of winter and shows up at Canossa. And what happens next is just unbelievable. For 3 straight days, the most powerful man in Europe stands outside the castle gates, barefoot, in the snow, begging. Finally, Gregory lets him in and lifts the excommunication.
And this isn't some myth, this is a historical fact. This quote here really captures the reality of it. Henry knew that if he didn't do this, he was going to lose his throne. The image of an emperor completely humbled before a pope. It was a shocking, unbelievable display of who really held the ultimate power.
Now, the political fighting would drag on for a while, but that moment at Canossa, it was a seismic shift. It marked a turning point. A brand new order was being established in Europe, and the papacy was at the very, very top.
So why does this one event matter so much? It's because it was such a powerful, symbolic victory for the Church. Canossa established a principle for the whole world to see, that the spiritual authority of the Pope could bring even the mightiest emperor to his knees. The power dynamic in Europe had been changed forever.
And over the next 100 years or so, the Church just built on that victory. By the year 1200, the papacy wasn't just a spiritual guide anymore. It had become the most powerful, complex, centralized government in all of Europe, period.
And the legacy of this power was just immense. Popes were now the referees in arguments between kings. The Church built its own massive legal system called canon law that governed huge parts of everyday life. A giant bureaucracy sprang up in Rome to manage it all. And, it was this centralized power that made something as massive as the Crusades even possible.
So, to bring it all back to the beginning, the Dark Ages, not a chance. This era was a turbulent, fiery forge. It was a time that hammered out the political and religious map of the entire medieval world, with the Church right at the center of it all.
Which leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. By building up all this incredible centralized power, was the Church creating its own golden age, or was it accidentally planting the seeds of the very challenges, like the Protestant Reformation, that would one day crack that universal body right apart?